Okay, so welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all. It's nice to be teaching here with my good friends, and you'll hear from each of us. But welcome to this exploration of the power of refuge. And I'm delighted to be offering this with my friends, partly because this is something that's touched each of us in some kind of way, and maybe it's an important but often unspoken way in which the refuge and that which we orient our lives towards has such a big impact on us. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy you all are here as well. And with that, I'll pass it on to Kim.
Wonderful. It's nice to see folks coming on. I see my interpretation is kind of interest and curiosity and brightness in your faces. And maybe that's just because that's what I'm feeling also. So I see that. I'm delighted to be here to talk about this topic. Um, One thing maybe that's coming to mind is there can be a lot of associations with a word like refuge. Is it religious? Is it I don't know. And so I hope, as we often do in these courses, we'll expand our understanding by talking around many different facets of a topic. That's one thing I love about this teaching team of four of us, is that we bring these different perspectives. So I hope that will be the flavor and the spirit in which we explore this. And I'll pass it to David.
Good morning or good day, depending on where you are. Welcome. Yeah, it's nice to look around and see faces and get a sense of people's, as you say, Kim, curiosity and interest and brightness, alertness, awakeness. That's all looks sweet. Yeah, I think as we'll explore the sort of finding refuge in the teachings, in the practice community, in the possibility of being more awake in the world are just really rich veins that run through the texts, run through the teachings, and are a really supportive aspect of our practice. So we're really happy to kind of be together to to further explore this. So welcome. Looking forward to spending a few days doing this. Ying.
Yeah, so I'll extend my warm welcome to all of you also. I just felt like, as we're gathering together, might there already be some hint of refuge, we're coming here. Something in our heart and mind kind of resonate with or curious about, and this word refuge, for me, coming from a native Chinese language, it took a while for me to connect with the word. Initially, it was just very flat. I don't quite understand what it means, and had to find my own way to relate to it. And as my wonderful co-teachers mentioned, for each of us, the sense of a refuge have over time shifted, changed, expanded, coming alive in different ways, kind of waking us up in various ways. And so we recognize that refuge is a word that show up. I guess a little translation of the word saranam show up in Pali Canon for sure. I was initially thinking whether I would say prominent presence, but maybe it's hard to really say whether it's prominent or a little bit. So I would just say that for sure, this notion of refuge is present in Pali Canon. And for some of us who has been kind of reading Pali Canon text for a while, we may get a sense, wow, this may be even an important notion for many people. And so this is a notion in the monastic tradition down through centuries, and quite prominent, I would say, in various ways. And but for Western lay practitioners, many of you who are on retreat would have experienced it, because often on retreats, taking refuges in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is what we do at the beginning of the retreat, as part of the ritual entering into a retreat environment to practice. But what does it mean for us as a lay practitioner connecting with this notion? So this class, we thought we will explore the various ideas that existed in the Pali Canon. And we'll also share a bit our own experiences and our own unfolding in how we relate to this word, refuge. And often it captures a range of meaning, as Kim was pointing to. For example, shelter, support, in terms of safety, protection. I know in the Chinese translation of this word, for me, often have a sense of returning home, maybe coming home to the heart's home, something like that. And so how might this word come alive in us? And so we want to offer some kind of a different aspects of what this refuge might evoke in a way to help us finding our own way that may provide safety, protection, grounds in the midst of our lives, and maybe even offer some way to empower us in our own practice in the Dharma field. And so as many of the Society Center courses that 4 of us have been doing, we will be incorporating the aspects of the Triple Jam in our sessions. And so there is an aspect of meditation, which I'll relate it to as Buddha. The image that comes to me meditating, the meditating Buddha that comes along. And we'll offer some teachings, and that's the refuge of Dhamma. And then we're coming together as a community to explore this, and that's the aspect of Sangha. And so classically, this is the refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so those elements are going to be part of this course unfolding. And even though the class will not include kind of a formal refuge-taking ceremony, we will take this opportunity to share the traditional chanting, Pali chant of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so you may get a chance to just kind of explore this a little bit for you and see how it feels for you. And so with that, as an overview of the course, I'm going to pass it on to Kim.
Thank you, Ying. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about how can we enter into this notion of refuge. And so we entitled this The Power of Refuge, as if there's maybe something important there for us, energetic, something supportive. We're going to be looking carefully at this notion over all 3 sessions. So these conventional ideas associated with the word refuge that Ying named, ideas like safety or shelter or protection, That's good enough to understand what refuge refers to. But then the issue for us is to understand what these mean in a spiritual sense. So we have this phrase in the Dharma like going for refuge or taking refuge. Refuge is common to all strands of Buddhism. It's not particular to one. But sometimes if we make it into a phrase like this, it gives the idea that it's something new or novel or extra, something additional that we might choose to add into our life. And I'm going to start out suggesting that this is not the case. Actually, we have already taken refuge. You already have, whether you think you have or not. Since refuge is common to all traditions, I want to start by quoting a Mahayana verse that points to this, to what I'm getting to. And actually, I'll just start with the first two lines. So it says, locked up in the prison of their own patterning, whom can ordinary gods protect? So this is a verse, it has some poetic understanding there. But this idea of ordinary gods refers to the kind of refuge that we've already taken, I'll suggest. So, for example, you might consider if any of these things I'm about to name feel like a basis for security in your life or happiness, your career, your relationships, your money or your wealth, your status or any positions that you have, your health or fitness, some learning or knowledge that you have, physical safety, etc. And I would say in the verse, these are what are called ordinary gods. And they're not inherently gods, but we make them into gods when we place our complete trust in them and pursue them with the idea that they will bring happiness and protection. So we've all taken refuge in these ordinary things to some degree. I'm not saying that they're not important. In fact, many of them are beautiful and they're blessings of a human life that is well lived. So we should have many of these things. It's not that we shouldn't or that we shouldn't enjoy them. But we have to also ask ourselves, isn't it the case that any one of them could go away pretty quickly without your having any control over that? Isn't that the case? So in such situations, we might feel betrayed, but actually these ordinary refuges, ordinary gods, are just doing as they do because they're not capable of providing complete security, deep or lasting happiness and protection that is guaranteed. So what do we do with that? Let me read the whole verse now. Locked up in the prison of their own patterning, whom can ordinary gods protect? Who can you count on for refuge? Go for refuge in the three jewels. This is the practice of a bodhisattva. So as I said, it's from the Mahayana tradition that talks more about bodhisattvas. But the three jewels that it points to as an alternative to placing our complete trust in these more ordinary blessings of life are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, as Ying named. These are a more reliable refuge. And we have to unpack what that means. And we'll do that in both traditional ways and maybe some surprising ways in this course. So how is it that people make the shift from relying only on ordinary refuges to realizing that there are deeper and more reliable possibilities? There are myriad ways, probably as many ways as there are people, but I want to name three broad categories that cover a lot of ground. So the first is that a lot of people come to spiritual practice, including Dharma practice, because one of their refuges went away, and they are feeling a lot of suffering from that. They feel without support, they feel unmoored, they feel without a basis. And this is a crisis in some ways. For many people, maybe someone in their life that they care about dies, and they don't know how to live after that. Or we lose our job, or we get a diagnosis that's disturbing to us, or a relationship of some other kind ends, etc. And I can say as a teacher that this is a reasonably large proportion of people who come to spiritual practice seeking some way to understand, integrate, find a deeper basis than these things that just did as they do proved themselves to be impermanent or unreliable. So this is an important part of practice, and this is even named in many early teachings about how people discover the spiritual side of life. And we'll touch into that as we continue to unfold this course. It's not the only way, actually, though, not always a loss or a tragedy that turns us toward deeper refuge. Sometimes what we feel is just disenchanted with the conventional goals and pleasures that were offered by the world. You know, we grow up in a culture that tells us that certain things will make us happy. And it's different in different cultures, but you know, maybe you learned that you should get an education and get a job and get married and have children and buy a house and have a dog, and you know, these kinds of things. And maybe you even succeeded in some fraction of them. And then there comes a point in life where you say, is this it? Did I check enough of the boxes? And maybe there's like a little feeling underneath, like it doesn't feel completely fulfilling. And some of us quickly suppress that idea because we don't know what to do with that. But that can also be a doorway into finding something else, feeling this disenchantment. So I want to offer a story from the Buddhist teachings. I'm sure there are many similar stories across spiritual traditions. But there were the two followers of the Buddha named Sariputta and Moggallana. They were his two chief disciples, actually, his right and left hand people, if you will. But before that, they grew up, you know, as Brahmins in Indian society. One was named Upatissa and one was named Kolita, and that was their original names. And they grew up as, you know, young men with a certain amount of means in a society that honored them. And so they would often, you know, they enjoyed that life, let's say. And there's a story in them of I think it's the Vinaya, where there's something called a hilltop festival that they have in their town. I don't know why, but like the hilltop is you know, it's like the carnival, you know, the place where you put the Ferris wheel and all this, where everybody can see it. And it was a big deal. You know, everyone would go to the hilltop festival. It had the music and dancing and shows and food and everything that you would want. And it was probably pretty exciting for an Indian town. And so they would go frequently and each year. And there came a year where they went there and they were doing all the usual stuff. And they probably, you know, there were probably, you know, pretty women to look at and all of that. And finally, you know, Upatissa nudges Kolita and says, are you having fun? And Kolita says, well, not really. Are you? And Upatissa says, no, actually. And they look at each other and they said, this isn't it. You know, this is just not doing it for us. And that was, you know, you can't unsee something like that once you've seen it. Really, it continues to kind of gnaw at the heart. And so that was their gateway to deciding to go out in the world and try to find something else. And they ended up going from teacher to teacher and pursuing different practices. And eventually they found the Buddha. But it's interesting to understand that it took them, I think, over 10 years before they found him, which means that they started looking for a teacher before the Buddha started his quest for awakening, right? So, they were, it took a long time, but with all that, with patience, they did eventually find that, and then they, found that that was more fulfilling for them. And this is, of course, also the Buddha's story, right? Is, growing up, he wasn't a Brahmin, but a different class or caste. But he grew up being told he'd be a leader in his society, and or that was at least what people in his position would maybe eventually be expected to do. And he was protected from anything that might upset him or make him decide to do something else with his life. And then, but again, he had this gnawing question, like, I don't, it's just not that exciting to me to grow up and replace my father as the head of our family unit. And so then he had his eyes opened through various stories say it differently, but he saw aging, illness, and death and said, this is it. This is understanding this is a deeper question than fulfilling those things my society talks about. So also disenchantment. So that can be a doorway, maybe even a more common one. If we look honestly, many of us have had that feeling, is this all? Is this really what it's about? And then there's a third. I'm sorry that this one seems to be the one that I see the least often, but it does become more prominent after someone has entered through one of the first two, which is that one becomes actively drawn toward the beauty and the inspiration of the spiritual life. One starts realizing, oh, this really expands my understanding. We start being less the center of our own world. We start seeing that there's much greater possibilities, that the mind is much bigger than we thought, that it's not about our original views and ideas. And we get really inspired. What is the potential of this human heart? Wow, it's so different than what I thought or what I was told. And so we're actively drawn toward what we find beautiful, what we understand to be wisdom, compassion, love, understanding, and maybe even awakening. Maybe all that is the process of awakening. So this path draws us toward something eventually, not just away from what didn't work. So those three doorways can help us to start to orient toward what is meant by and captured in this single idea of the triple gem of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's a protection to pull us away from what was harmful for us or not fulfilling. And it's also a pathway toward what is beautiful and fulfilling. And different sides of the two sides of the same hand. We can go along each of those as pathways at different times and in different phases of our practice. So I hope this gives us a sense of the potential. And maybe just to tie back in, spend a moment reflecting, what have you taken refuge in already? What is the security and the safety in your life if somebody asked you to make a list right now? And could you rank those by which is more reliable and which is less reliable? So with that, we'll meditate together. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Beautiful. I'm struck by, as Kim talks, just sort of how much movement there is. The way we are attracted to things in the world with the way we project our views on the world, and then have this place to come back to. It's interesting that in this spiritual path, although we sort of look outward toward teachers and toward teachings, we're encouraged to keep coming back to the refuge of the meditation. And so we'll sit together and just enjoy that. And the way I'd like to preface it is we'll play around a little bit over these coming days with this idea and even the word of refuge. And I was thinking I'd do it later in the week, but I had my phone in hand, and I was reminded that refuge in the Latin roots, which are kind of there in our awareness, in this case, the word means to flee back, to flee back. And again, there's that idea of coming back to something that, as Kim has indicated, is something safe, trustworthy, something that leads onward to greater peace. And the word flee sort of sits a little uncomfortably with this morning. So I looked up this was the use of the phone. I just looked up a couple synonyms, and there are many. And along with things like skedaddle and vamoose, the words that we don't find in the ancient texts, there are a couple that I think are useful today. One is escape. As Kim said, we're already taking refuge, and yet this practice in a way provides an escape from some of the refuges that aren't healthy or skillful or onward leading. And the other one that I found very sort of stimulating is to make oneself scarce. Of course, in a Buddhist context, there's the idea that we can get ourselves kind of out of the middle of things. And with that motion, we can sort of free up what's available in the world. And so I'd like to kind of make that the theme of the meditation. This idea that in the meditation, we have an opportunity to know, to sense, to rest in a place where we can learn and we can enter into sort of direct contact with our experience in a way that is freeing. So take a meditation posture, bring your eyes down if that's comfortable, and bring attention to here and now of our experience. In this experience of the meditation, we can find a place where we're not adding a lot of extra, where our refuge can just be in the easy knowing, the easy sensing, the easy resting of awareness in the here and now of our lives. And one way to do that is to begin by taking stock of the body, maybe noticing the weight of the body, maybe the frame of the body. Maybe there's some holding or stress or bracing in the body, in the shoulders, around the eyes. And what we can notice in this, even entering the meditation, is that when we give the gift of attention to our experience, there can be an easing. Just this simple gift of knowing what's going on right now is easeful. And in the meditation, of course, we do this over and over and over again, this wonderful return from wherever our attentions become entangled to the here and now of experience, coming back to the body and perhaps touching into the sensations of the breathing at the very middle of our experience of the body. So in this meditation today, we can just recognize that with each return of attention to the breath or to the body, to the here and now, we can find a refuge in a simple experience that within it has a considerable ease or peace available. And one of the lovely things about meditation, particularly as we settle into it, is we have many opportunities to keep returning, keep finding refuge in the here and now of experience. Because the mind is a busy thing when we first sit down. But we can actually come to really love as well as benefit from this movement of attention, this orientation of attention to the here and now. So when the mind, as it will, because its mind gets snagged, entangled, caught up in thinking about the future, thinking about the past, thinking about other people, thinking about ourselves and the world, we can gently, without hurry, bring our attention back to the here and now, maybe connecting again with the breathing happening. The idea of returning our attention to the breath is one way to notice this returning, this sense of refuge in here and now. Alternately, sometimes it feels like the mind's become contracted and tight, narrow, around a particular pattern of thinking, particular spiral of thought. And then we might return to the here and now by opening our attention back up, easing off from that tight focus and broadening awareness back to the here and now. And each time we do this, each time we come back to here and now, returning our attention or opening our attention back up more broadly, if we do it without hurry, without any violence, without any sense of, oh, something's gone wrong, or, oh, I got all lost there. And if we just come back to the breathing easily, or we just open our attention up broadly with ease, without hurry, we'll notice that the being here and now is more simple. It's more balanced. It has a slower pace than when we are wrapped up in thought, lost in thought. And each time we return, we have this opportunity to have a brief ah moment of, oh, just the breath happening, just this breath. And now this breath. Just a simple experiencing of this moment. We can notice as we sit here and now that there's a balance here. It's a natural balance in the breathing. Just the right amount of oxygen in, just the right amount of waste gas out. No doing is needed. We can just rest in that simple knowing of balance. And maybe here in this possibility of direct experience of here and now without adding very much, without adding anything, maybe. Maybe here is the fundamental refuge offered by this practice. We can know the possibility of greater ease and sense the momentum building toward freedom. We can rest in this method of meeting experience, coming back over and over again to here and now, and just knowing, sensing without adding anything, what's happening now. And we can feel safety and support in this community of practice that values awakening, orients towards awakening, shares teachings, supports practice. So let's just keep for a few minutes in silence, returning and resting, returning and resting. So as we come toward the end of this brief sit, maybe we just notice again that there can be refuge in this experience. The simple knowing, the simple sensing, the simple resting in the meditation. Thank you. Thank you for sitting together. It's a sweet thing we do, meditating alone together. So I see that the next person I turn the microphone over to is David. So let's open it up to some questions or observations about the teachings provided by Kim, by your experience during the meditation, and just sort of see what bubbles up. We like to get voices in the room and get a sense of what's up for people in their practice. So feel free, we're a small group, feel free to raise your Zoom hand, raise a physical hand, and yeah, pepper us with questions and or observations. There's a hand. Hi, Christy. Yeah.
So, Kim, I really appreciate the reminder about the ordinary gods that we've already taken refuge with, and it feels like in many ways we've given our whole lives to these. I'm going to put my whole trust in these to just kind of get me to the end, and I mean, it seems like there's I'm gonna just put trust in this class to just it seems like you're gonna be kind of you've got probably I know I did retreat with you all, and so I'm sure you've got you're gonna start with the beginnings and middles and end, but I'm just you've got me all curious now, like, okay, so what's the next step and how do you go? So but I think I'm just gonna trust this process but if there is like okay, what's next, then you can just let me know now.
Well, you assume we have a plan, which in this case is a safe assumption. Yes, there is a plan. Nonetheless, yeah, questions arise at any time, and I think I can speak for the four of us. We appreciate the trust in us. Yeah, thank you, Christy. Yeah. Anything else come up for anyone?
Yeah, I think I'd like to highlight the that you said, Christy, that you're just going to trust the process, which was sort of spontaneous language that came forth. But I want to reflect it back, actually, quite sincerely, and say that that is part of the refuge of the Dharma, is that we trust some kind of process is happening that we're participating in, but might not fully comprehend with our state of consciousness. So I'm curious I just want to reflect that back, and it could just be enough, but if there's anything else that comes up for you as I say that, what does it feel like to have trust in the process?
Well, I'd imagine that everybody in this Zoom room is here because we've experienced what's happened when we've trusted this process a little and then given ourselves to it and then trusted more. And so, yeah, I think it's been a beautiful unfolding of this lotus of trust. And so, yeah, I think that's why we're here. So thank you.
Nice.
Back to me.
Well put. Yeah, in the meditation, one word that dropped in, I didn't have any plan for the guiding, but that's I feel again as you speak, Christy and Kim, as you draw that forth, is just that idea of momentum. Refuge can be something we seek, but it can also be something that we notice happening. Oh, refuge is being found, or there's refuging happening. That's to make a verb out of a noun that comes from a verb, but hey, we just did it. But to be aware that, the more I find refuge in, for example, the meditation or the experience of the meditation, there's a momentum that happens. There's an inclination of mind to keep moving toward greater freedom. So yeah, trusting the process can be also kind of noticing that momentum and trusting that. So, other thoughts from teaching colleagues or others? Okay, I see, Jerry, your hand went up. Samantha, I also see your hand. I want to go to Samantha because I think I might have missed it a moment ago.
Hi, thank you for these teachings. It's wonderful to be here. And I know this is kind of basic Buddhism, but talking about those ordinary gods, it's just a reminder of all of those things are important, impermanent, and we want them, we cling to them, and we so desperately want them to be permanent. And as we walk through life and suffer as we cling to their impermanence, it's just such a reminder of how important that understanding is. And then, Kim, you mentioned the third thing was, I think after we've reached for the three jewels, and we do start to realize and really embody that those are reliable refuges rather than these other things that are impermanent, it's easier to keep on turning to the three jewels as they're more reliable. So I just appreciate that reminder of these ordinary gods that we cling to, and how we need to let go of our ideas and our hopes that they're going to be there for us, because they're not, and they fall away. So I appreciate this teaching. It's been great. Thanks.
Yeah, you said it very well. And I did name them as blessings. We need a certain number of these things that I named as ordinary gods. We need those in order to create a life of practice. So there's already some subtlety there, and you have to have enough of them in order to be able to do the practice. But already we have to learn, but there can't be the clinging to them, or it impedes practice. So I like the way, yeah. Thank you for highlighting that.
And I appreciate, Samantha, just your use of the phrase basic Buddhism, and then the way you went on effortlessly to show how the most advanced teachings available in the practice are there in the foundational instructions, and are so I love that about Buddhist practice, that it's in a way there's no such thing as basic Buddhism, and there's no such thing as advanced teachings. They're sort of one and the same. More about that, I'm sure, as we go forward. Jerry.
When Kim, what you read, it starts off with the patterns of our is it of our lives or of our reactivity, or it starts out with the patterns and then it branches out from that, right? And I heard that correctly. So that, and also my own inclination towards clinging, so that in this case, I would think that refuge has a degree of familiarity, and yet I think that how we define that could be clinging, which is not really a refuge. I mean, I wasn't spending a lot of time during that nice sort of sit on that. But what helps me is I don't focus on the breath, I focus on the embodiment. So there's not one aspect. And I'm more sort of focusing on the refuge is the process. So I'm watching the process instead of, because if you ask me get that process going, I don't really know how to do that. So the refuge is in the life force is now letting me know that it's there inside of me. And that's refuge. I hope that makes any sense without it being clinging, because the life force is too big to cling to. It's noticing. I hope that I better start now before I keep babbling. I hope that makes a little sense.
I see Kim nodding, so it must make sense to her. Yeah, yeah. I like one aspect, kind of a Zen way of saying something about what Jerry shared is that there's refuge in the not knowing. Letting a lot of that concern with knowing sort of rest as we rest. I see David's hand, and we want to move to the next teaching. David, go ahead and jump in with your question or thought. And
Sure. Thank you, David, and everyone, all the teachers for this morning. I just had an experience about a week ago of that reaffirmed my sense of Sangha and refuge. And it took place, interestingly to me, in a non-Buddhist context. A very dear cousin of mine passed away a couple of weeks ago. And last weekend, I went to the celebration of life services in her memory. I often thought of this dear cousin who was not Buddhist. I thought of her as a gentle Christian. And while I was at the services, I felt the Dharma, although no one was talking about it because they were all Christians. And I felt the Sangha, and I felt people taking refuge in each other. And I felt myself taking refuge, especially in the gathered family. So I experienced the loss of a refuge, an ordinary refuge, my refuge in my beloved cousin. And I experienced refuge in another. I realized that my family is not permanent, that we too will eventually pass away. And yet it put me back in a space where I appreciated taking the refuge in the Dharma. So it reaffirmed in an oddly roundabout way, if you will, it reaffirmed my own sense of the importance of Dharma practice.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that all makes sense, but that was a very moving experience for me.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, David. That's sweet. And I like the way you sort of illustrate how, another way of thinking of taking refuge is we take it where we find it and as we find it. So appreciate that. I'm going to pass it to Ying now.
Yeah, I feel quite touched by all the sharing. There's a sense of us finding our ways and finding our relationship with the refuge is an ongoing unfolding. It's kind of ever enriching, and maybe we'll find it in some really surprising places and that we never pay attention to, and allow the blossoming of taking refuge to come forth inside of us. And so this part and this next part of teaching and that we will be offering, the four of us will do it together. And so we thought of following what Kim had offered in terms of what the ordinary God refuge versus the kind of a finding something that touches us deeply. And each of us may have our own way of seeking and touching in with refuges, and how does it unfold for each of us. So we thought we'll share something maybe personal in terms of how we found our way. So we called this a we seeking. And not as a way to say these are the only ways, but rather, Kim offered kind of a broader range of how we might come into or touching into the refuge ourselves, but also point out that this is a range. This is a range, and this is still unfolding in its own way. And maybe the invitation is for each of us to kind of tune in to how it might unfold for us, for each of us. And so that's the orientation we're going to offer this from. And so I'll start to share a little in terms of my early days of finding my way. I came to this country when I was I just turned 20, and I came kind of a bit of a surprise, unexpected, and I resonated with what Kim said in terms of kind of life circumstances that you just run into. I came to this country basically has a suitcase that is about the size of going to a 1-week retreat. I have a few dollars in my pocket, but reflecting back, it was a very daunting experience. I didn't feel exactly confused or disoriented, but I was confused, disoriented, just imagining the language is different, the food is different, all your friends are gone. and it's pretty groundless, let's say. And so it feels like all the structures that supports my life are kind of gone, pulled underneath from me. But I was very fortunate that I had a college roommate who took me to a local Taiwanese Pure Land Sangha. And I met this group of practitioners who had such a different orientation than how I had lived up to that point, which is so much is survival oriented, getting the basic needs met. And this group of people just offered a different lens altogether, that they're quite selfless. They're so service oriented. They would not even kill insects. That was like, what a big news to me. I was like, what? And so it really kind of shocked me, shook my system. And yet, it resonated with me so deeply. And as Kim was pointing out, that the first kind of refuge might take us to like the third kind. It was kind of opened up to something that I never had experienced before. So I thought to myself, wow, I need to be finding this kind of groups everywhere I go. And so that's how it began, kind of the way seeking for myself. And I went to different places and began to seek for Buddhism, Buddhist communities. And I continue ahead of the other godly refuges that I'm hanging on to. But this began to be a stream in my life, and that I continued to explore. And so with that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague, Kim, next.
Thank you. So I also had a fairly classic opening of the refuges falling away. My ordinary refuges when I was around age 30 or so were, putting energy into my career. And that time I was I had good physical health. And so I was quite shocked when for unknown reasons, my body changed, and I developed a kind of a pain syndrome that was not identifiable medically. I have different explanations for it now, having, me perhaps being out of alignment in my life in some way. But I was not prepared for that heavenly messenger, and I didn't have the resources from my earlier life, what I had put my mind toward up to that point, to really understand how to deal with failing health at early 30s. It just didn't make sense to me, and it seemed to threaten the career that I was trying to develop. And so I felt quite disoriented and mentally distraught, because actually part of my refuge had been to use my body as a way to relieve stress. So I was an athlete, for example, and that became unavailable. And so I suffered quite a bit for a short time, and then found again, like Ying, I ran into a spiritual community. I found IMC, I found meditators. I had a understanding of meditation from earlier in my life. Not that I had done it, but I was at least not averse to it or such, because I had been around it in my family. And so that was a great blessing, that I had a sort of an automatic understanding of what this is and what it can do. And so when I touched into that, I knew immediately that this made sense to me, and I found the community that I ended up practicing with for a long time. And I ended up, my personal issues were, in a sense, became a smaller part of my love for the Dharma. I just fell in love with the teachings. I gained a whole different perspective on life, and I haven't looked back from there. It's been so clear that that's much better orientation. And then I'll just mention that I did have the chance to do a formal refuge ceremony at IMC where I've practiced. And it was surprisingly deep. I'm not a ceremony kind of person, or at least I wasn't at that time. And it just filled me with joy. And I felt all this like subtle energy and a feeling of being home, to echo what Ying said earlier. So these were all clear indications that I was going in the right direction, much beyond what I could explain very well. So let's move on to Diana.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Ying. When I heard Kim tell the story of Sariputta Moggallana, and one of them on this carnival saying, "Are you having fun?" Yeah, I'm not either. That's kind of my story, a little bit of a story that I certainly had given refuge to all these ordinary gods that Kim spoke about. Like, certainly I was like all in and did all the things that I thought I was supposed to do in order to be happy. And, you know, maybe from the outside, it looked like, oh, okay, Diana achieved what we often want to achieve. And I just felt like, this is awful. I have this fantastic job. I have like all these good things in my life, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. And I couldn't tell you exactly what it was that wasn't right, or what it was that felt kind of like empty, but this disappointment, this terrible disappointment, what I had worked so hard for, turned out not to be as fulfilling as what I thought it would be. And it's interesting now for me to reflect on how different individuals have had such a big impact. One individual saying, oh, maybe go on a meditation retreat. And I'd never even meditated a day in my life. I'm trained as a scientist. I thought meditation was weird. Like, why would I do that? But I thought, okay, you know, why not? I'll do it. I thought I knew how to meditate. I did not know how to meditate. But this retreat like really touched something, like, oh, something different. And it really highlighted for me that I had been taking refuge into understanding. You know, I'm trained as a scientist, like we want to figure things out. We know how they are. We put them into neat little boxes. But then with this meditation retreat, it really opened me up to like, oh, I didn't quite understand that. Something definitely happened, or that was different, and I didn't understand it. And it felt nourishing in a way that other types of understanding didn't feel nourishing. And then as it happened, you know, another individual kind of like encouraged me to go to IMC, the Insight Meditation Center there in Redwood City. And another individual encouraged me, oh yeah, there's going to be this refuge ceremony. Maybe you should participate. And I went with this one individual. And it also really touched me, like, oh yeah, there's something here that, I'll use this word, nourishing, that was really feeding something that I didn't even know was hungry. So that's a little bit of my story. And then I'll pass it on to David.
And I'm going to be really brief and highlight something a little different, which is more sort of maybe recognizing refuge rather than sort of seeking it. And to be brief, I'm going to make reference, it just came up for me right this moment, to the opening lines of the Divine Comedy, Dante's Divine Comedy, where it says something to the effect, I'm remembering 40 years ago to college, but it says something like, in the middle of life, I found myself in a dark wood. And, you know, my wood, it wasn't that dark. It would be uncharitable to complain too much. But for various reasons, I had meditated since I was a young person in some different ways. But I hadn't really, except for when illness was there. And I started meditating to kind of accompany a friend who was dying. And I rediscovered in the meditation, I had this sense of, oh, right, this refuge, this space, this way of being with experience. And it was like this sense of remembering and recognizing, oh, there's a path here. There's something that moves in a direction where there's something I want or I aspire to, some ease or some freedom. And so again, maybe that turned up a little bit in the guided, just recognizing the refuge in the meditation and sort of their various aspects of the refuge that we're, teasing apart and calling by different names, but that sense of refuge in the possibility of awakening and the method of meeting experience and the sense of a community, as Ying in particular emphasized, that's there to support the practice and be a refuge. So, Diana.
Thank you, David. And again, I'm going to say thank you to Kim and Ying too. It's kind of sweet, right? That we all have our stories and the four of us find ourselves teaching together. For those of you who don't know, I don't know the exact number, but this is 25th course that we've taught together, something like this. So it's something beautiful that the four of us find ourselves teaching together. So now we'd like to provide an opportunity for you all to talk amongst yourselves and just tell really brief your way to, we might say, if you're here in this course, that there's a way in which you are taking refuge in this notion of practice, or this notion of Buddhism, or this notion of being present or mindfulness. And so it can be helpful to just reflect on and then to share really briefly. I'm going to emphasize this briefly part. How did you find your way to practice? How is it that you were taking refuge, we might say, in practice, meditation practice, mindfulness, Buddhist practice, spiritual practice? So just as the four of us had all different stories, we don't all need to think the same. We don't need to all be having our same way in. I think that's a theme that we're really highlighting in this first class here. We don't need to I just want to honor, maybe encourage everybody to honor and respect what everybody says, and hold the space for it, and just an opportunity to listen and hear. Also, please don't, take so long that other people don't have an opportunity to speak. So watch the time. There'll be a timer in the breakout room, and let's, take care of each other in there so that there's room for everybody to have an opportunity to share. There'll be maybe 3 of you, so maybe 4 or maybe even 2 in some of the groups, and there'll be about, I don't know, maybe 12 minutes, maybe a few minutes less, 12 minutes. And so how did you find your way to practice? We might say taking refuge in practice. And here we go. Okay, so welcome back. Welcome back from that breakout room. And we'd love to hear from you. How was that to connect about something maybe that you haven't spoken about or considered, or maybe you haven't thought about it in terms of refuge, what you're taking refuge in now, but we'd love to hear from some of you, either how that experience was to be in a breakout room and sharing, or what maybe some new understandings or new ideas when you consider the way that you found your way to practice in terms of refuge. So if you'd like to raise your hand. Vaz.
Hi, thanks for the class. Appreciate being here. Well, the thing that jumped out in our group for me was how COVID was such a fertile ground for nourishing and growing for all 3 of us in the group. It seemed like that was a real spark, a real time period where and all three of us dove into the practice, as it were, into the refuge of the practice during the time where we couldn't do anything much else. So yeah, that was kind of a interesting common revelation amongst all three of us.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, something that, who knew what these different outcomes were going to be of COVID, and I'm sure we'll still to discover, but I'm happy through something difficult like that, people found their way to the Dharma. It's something that can be a support. Kim.
I see that our phone guest, Michael, has unmuted. Is that for a comment?
Michael, do you have something you'd like to say? Nope, he muted himself. Okay. Any other comment? David.
Yeah, thank you for the breakout room. My experience was sort of what you might call an instant sangha. The three of us had a lovely sharing of our experiences, and we all came to the Dharma by different paths. And one of the things that I have really realized during the breakout room is that much of my life I felt homeless. And and I was always looking for a home. And it's only now that I realized I was looking for refuge. And I finally found it in my Dharma practice through rather convoluted path. But I'm here, and I think that's what counts. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Sometimes we describe the practice, I know I certainly have described it this way, as coming home, like coming home to ourselves in this way that we didn't even know maybe we were disconnected from ourselves. But yeah, coming home. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Yeah, this is kind of how I related it to the sense of refuge, because in the Chinese word, gui means return, and oftentimes it's related to return home. And for me, it really made a huge sense because the word often relate to something about we have wandered far away, like overseas, and then you're coming home. And so for me, it was very vivid in that way of relating, wow, we really wandered very far out there somehow. And now we're coming home. So, yeah.
Maybe one more comment. Mariah.
Oh, just real quickly, thank you so much for this beautiful class. I had a recent experience that I never had before, vertigo. In the middle of the night, I wake up and I tried to get out of bed because I had to pee, and I couldn't because I was so dizzy. And the feeling was that someone had taken my head and hurled it into outer space at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There was like no ground. There was no. Anyway, the refuge was that I immediately went into my feet and the part of my body that was in a stable on the bed, and found that there was a sense of being present there, and that I could rest there and wait it out. And it seems like a tiny little refuge, mindfulness of the body, but for me it was huge because I didn't think I'd really developed it that strongly, but it just came, boom, fruit of the practice. Refuge in the body. So the body that's sick, but nonetheless, So just wanted to say that.
Nice. The body, mindfulness of the body turns out to be so foundational, so important. Thank you. Thank you, Mariah. I'm happy to hear that you no longer have vertigo. It's an awful experience. Kim.
Okay, well, we're winding up to our last few minutes together for this session. And we hope a few of the comments have affirmed this, kind of a nice introduction into this topic of what refuge even means and starting to find out what it means for us. That's a reliable place to start, as we now will go on to explore some more classical teachings in the other sessions. I hope what that will do is that those won't feel so much like something coming in from outside that I have to figure out or adapt to or idealize, but instead what we hear in these classical teachings is how it resonates with what we already know of refuge from our own practice. And then it's much more meaningful. And so the encouragement, we only have a couple days, there's no homework, but maybe just based on what you touched into today, to consider that you can reframe maybe that you're coming to practice in terms of this idea of refuge, sarana, that we're trying to develop. We might have thought, I just found meditation and it was so much help for my stress or something like that. But could you reframe that as I used to, think that it would be helpful to play video games till 3 a.m, but then I discovered that meditation is a better refuge, something like that. And, just seeing it more in terms of this idea of what I had before was somewhat unreliable or not really working or actually going against what I really wanted. I was firing myself up in certain ways, and now there's something that's more aligned, more like it feels home, more like I'm coming back to what works for this being. And so reframing in that way. And along with that, I know we're right at time, is to be careful not to disparage too much our prior refuges. They might have been, if they were truly unwholesome, we can be clear that that was a mistake. But a lot of times it was just that we were following something ordinary because we weren't thinking about it really carefully. And so it's like, yeah, you found something deeper, and, the old thing was just what it was. So try not to, disparage your prior self in a sense. So it's a moving forward, always a moving forward and an expansion and a deepening of what is reliable and helpful and onward leading. So with that, thank you. We'll hope to see you in a couple days.
Take care, everyone. Till
Feel free to
Thursday.
unmute and say goodbye.
Bye bye, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah,
See you.
see you
Bye.
on
Thank you.
Thursday.